Hi everybody, here we are with new European perspective number 11, and so tonight we discuss about Europe strategic autonomy. It is too late? It's a great question, because after the last reflection that was done in the geopolitical European anticipation bullet by Marie-Hélène and the others, in the last bulletin, that is 153, Europe, it's the moment to reflect and take the occasion of COVID for this transition, systemic transition that is now maybe exploited to move forward another strategic autonomy. This is this discussion that we do together to see where we can go and how. And if there is some ideological revolution in the Commission during these days, and so what means, and if it needs a revolution. So here we are tonight with Marie-Hélène, that is Presidente au Laboratoire Européen d'Anticipation Politique, and that is Published Director of Gib by Lib. We have Adrian Taylor, who we have seen already other times when we discuss of strategy and look forward. That is the founder for seeing Foresight to Strategy for Sustainability and Security in Government. We have an important invited is Laurent Bontou of the European Commission. We have Jeta Grama-Molman, this is for 2440. So, Marie-Hélène, I let you introduce our discussion and see what our guest may say to us. I don't see Laurent. Why?
Yes.
Okay.
Laurent disappeared. Try to find him.
Okay, voilà. So here Adrian, so Laurent, Jeta, voilà. And then, so Marie-Hélène, I let you introduce.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Maria. Stephanie, thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So, yes, the topic this time is, again, a bit provocative. It relates very much to the last edition of our publication, the LEAP Confidential Bulletin, the Global Europe Anticipation Bulletin, the GIB, which in March, not last edition, by the way, it's the March edition, which described and voila, this strategy, this vision that is emerging, that has emerged in the past few years and months, and in the context of the COVID, on the part of the European Union and the European Commission in particular, which we think is very positive. It's about resilience, it's about digital transition, green transition, it's about strategic autonomy. But somehow it is a very ambitious project, very, very ambitious. And somehow, we have used the expression that it's an ideological revolution in some ways. For instance, the strategic autonomy vision is is rather contradicting in some ways the previous principle of rather liberal, very liberal and open-bordered EU. So on the one hand, we have this very, very ambitious project. And on the other, we have this post-COVID, or even we are still in the COVID, of course, but we envision a post-COVID world where EU could you cut your microphones, because I hear lots of noises and it's not so. Yes, we have this post-COVID world at which we think we analyze in the GIB that it's going to correspond to return to reality. There is going to the EU, not only the EU, but in this case we were talking about the EU, is going to be confronted to many principles of reality that might disrupt or hamper, block the realization of this vision. And that's what we are interested in challenging today with you, Adrian, and Laurent and Jeta. So among these principles of reality, there is, of course, this inflation that we see surging everywhere, which means that this transition that has been envisioned by the EU, is it going to be faced to price issues, to cost issues, not price, but cost issues? This inflation, what impact is it going to have on our economic model? And is it going to be compatible with these big, costly visions? There is, of course, also, I'm going to review some of them that we've reviewed in the GIB. There is, of course, this Western-Chinese conflict, struggle, let's say, which is impacting some materials that we need for this transition. If we talk, for instance, about the digital or the green transition, we need elements and components that come from China, such as semiconductors, rare earths, solar panels. So what with this conflict between the West and China? We have huge risks of a return of new forms of populism due to, indeed, the shock on the societies that the COVID has exerted. So are these maybe coming governments going to be compatible also with these agendas? There is, of course, this debt, this huge debt, this cost. Again, it's about also the inflation, but the debt, the financing capacity. In the GIB, we've seen how much the EU has been doing a good work last year, in particular, in terms of trying to bring together the Europeans and strengthen the financial capacity of the European Union. But it's not final. We see that for instance, the recovery plan of the Europeans is not yet adopted. For instance, what if it was not adopted? And this is something very important that we highlighted in this March edition of the GIB. It's this global competition, this jungle, we call it, and the fact that the EU is a very legal and loyal actor, very complex and very slow, therefore, and which therefore is going to be in a difficult position in a world where you have very, very fast players who are playing lawlessly in this global competition jungle. And that's where also we think that this ideological revolution of the EU has to go alongside a structural revolution of the EU. And are we going to be capable of implementing that? We see also risks of dislocation. So that's something that we'd like to discuss with you. Is the EU as strong as it seemed to be last year? Last year in 2020, we obviously saw that the COVID was providing some momentum for the EU construction, for the EU project. But we seem to, I don't know if you will agree on the fact that 2021 seems to be a lot harder on the EU in particular. Not only the vaccination campaign is being very criticized. I mentioned earlier this European recovery plan, which new next generation plan, which we don't know exactly where it's going. And we have also this digital tax, which was a big project, and now it's being now there is Biden coming with this corporate tax, which of course goes in the same direction, but we therefore now rely on the American side, and we are abandoning maybe our own strategy in this regard. Even though we need very much this taxation reform in order to fund this transition that the EU has in mind. So we see so many challenges in the very short to medium term for the EU in implementing its vision. And again, of course, Leap has always this is it too late? There is also this idea that if the EU needs to achieve this plan, needs structural reform, which is what we bet it requires to have. Does it still have, knowing that there has not been this anchoring into a European citizenship, there hasn't been this democratization, etc. How is the EU going to achieve a reform which will require to go through maybe probably and certainly to go through referendums which are very difficult to win in a context where citizens are hardly connected to this EU level. So that's the very, very specific problem we see for the EU today. It's where will it find the political the anchorage to actually implement the changes required in order to address these big challenges. So I will ask maybe first of all to Laurent Bontou, because Laurent, you work for the European Commission, so you have insights you on this. So all these questions, what would you say on some of these questions that I raised?
Thank you very much, Marie-Hélène. So yes, I work for the European Commission, but I'm here in my personal capacity, ready to engage, in discussions about the future of Europe. And I think that your portrait of the current situation is quite accurate. But I think it's a witness to the fact that we are now living a very complex transition. So the situation is very dynamic. We've seen over the last 2 years, a large number of very unexpected events happen, which have been profoundly transforming, international and national life, and of course, the European Union itself. And putting the question of, in terms of, is it too late? I would reply that, well, it's a very dynamic situation. So yes, it's always too late for something, but it's never too late for something else. So I think we should really look at the situation in its systemic complexity, at the same time as seeing it in its dynamic. This time dynamic where things change constantly, and when sometimes a month can mean a revolution in how people think. When COVID-19 happened, there were a lot of certainties that people had that were just thrown out the window in a matter of days. So I think that we have to be ready for the unexpected. And I say that when I looked at my profession, being active in Foresight, that's why Foresight is now actually more useful and more needed than ever. But I think that people should also take Foresight seriously and not limited to exercise like forecasting, for example, and really see that as participatory, inclusive, collective intelligence exercises, to help us together as a collective at the scale of the European Union to actually imagine a better future for ourselves.
Okay, so we'll come back on some of these aspects, but for now, Laurent, that's your position. And maybe Jetta, you would like also to say something about all these principles of reality that I listed, and how you see the future.
Hello, everyone. Today's topic, strategic autonomy, is very daring, in my opinion. Let's remember, after Donald Trump's America First slogan, Beijing Made in China 2025 slogan, here comes Europe with strategic autonomy, which, whatever that means. Anyways, it's a catchphrase, in my opinion, and because who does not want to become sovereign in terms of energy, in terms of food, in terms of resources, and be able to rely on yourself is really something that any part or block in this world might want to achieve. It's a label for the member states as well to increase their self-sufficiency and to boost their economies and industries. But let's first try to find together a definition of what Europe should see in this strategic autonomy. What if it's the goal number one of our generation, to become a continent that can rely on itself, that can say yes or no to alliances that it doesn't want, to join or to be part of, without sacrificing our freedom and freedom of trade, for example, or mobility, without closing our borders? How can be autonomous? How can Europe be autonomous? Of course, we have a growing population in the world, and I'm more and more concerned about this because you maybe do not know the city I live in, Cluj-Napoca, but let's take Venice, for instance. We all know Venice, how vocal it is, how vivid it is, how happy people are there, but also angry and sad and depressed in some times. Can you picture that every day of the year, Venice, in terms of population, is born? So 365 Venice cities are born every year, not in the desert areas, not in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but in already urbanized areas of this world. So imagine Venice City stick to Paris today, to Berlin tomorrow, to London the day after tomorrow, and to Bucharest and New York and so on. So already growing populations in smaller and smaller areas with less and less green areas and with drier and warmer and more polluted locations. How can Europe be autonomous with states that do not take this into consideration? We need to feed all these people. We need to provide water and good conditions, education, healthcare, and so on. So how can we say that strategic autonomy addresses this as well? In my perspective, I think it's a process of political survival. Alliances will have to remain essential simply because we are in a situation now where economic interdependence is also becoming politically conflictual. So autonomy is far from being a magic wand, but it can be a long-term process we take into consideration, we get prepared for, in order to ensure that Europeans more and more become, let's say, can guarantee their future and take care of themselves in the maybe not short term, but middle and long term. And this is also something that might be helpful for Europe and also for other parts of the world.
Okay, thank you very much, Jetta. So in favor of the strategic autonomy, but well, I'd like to highlight that the EU project as a whole, since the Treaty of Rome, has been a project of strategic autonomy. So Adrian, now, what will you tell us about this topic?
Well, good evening from my side. Welcome. Thank you. I'm sitting here in Hamburg and listening to some very interesting inputs here. I'd like to break my part into two separate sections. So I'll say a bit now, which is trying to depress everybody. And maybe a little bit later, I'll get another chance to talk. And then I'll try and cheer us all up again by doing some foresight a little bit, as Laurent and I have that common default of both being prospectivist people who look at the future and try and derive strategic, relevant decisions for today. So let me start with the depressing parts, Marie-Hélène, and just build on some of the things that all three of you have mentioned. I suspect that one of the reasons we have, this America First was quoted already, is that the international environment has changed. At one point in the 90s, the United States had every interest in a stronger Europe because it was a means of absorbing that part of the Warsaw Bloc, which was just existed and was now falling apart, of actually keeping the European continent stable. So they had every interest that we actually be part of a stable zone and we be strong to pull those people in. The Chinese, interestingly, had every interest. Deng Xiaoping's motto was, of course, that China was not to become too large too quick, not too loud too quick. They wanted somebody else that would grow with them at the same time to become more important on the world scene, because then China would not be the obvious nail to keep on hitting on the head of. So the Europeans, if the Europeans were big as well as the Chinese, there was more than just one person in the game. Likewise, the Russians were in total disorder. They really didn't, they were sort of finding their own house, and Putin comes in and tries to put order in. First of all, gets rid of the oligarchs and whatever else. But there was a kind of hiatus at that time. That has slowly changed. Basically, since 2001, it has changed repeatedly and more starkly. It starts with obviously Don Rumsfeld and the coalitions of the willing, but it keeps on building. The Chinese are now no longer on that track of Deng Xiaoping. Now it's we are loud and we are back. We don't need anybody else. It's the G2 that counts now. And this Russia, since Ukraine, but even before, you could see the notion of we're living in that environment where we need this European. No, it's gone. So we're now back into that hardball, that fight it out, that zero-sum game of the realist or neo-realist world, where if I get something, you lose something. That was not the game we, the European Union, were built for. Now, we have institutions which were designed, as Marie-Hélène, I think you said, that were designed to work slowly, but to process things through a nice compromise, and where, in a sense, being shuttered from the outside shocks was a good thing. So we're not really set up for that game. And if you look at the things we now have set up, such as the European External Action Service, a kind of UN gone wrong, I'm afraid to say, from the way I see it, you really don't have the institutions that are required to handle those kinds of shocks. And likewise, we also see in terms of the internal dynamics of the European Union, what is going on. You mentioned democracy on the European level, Marie-Hélène. Yes, there is very little connection between, shall we say, citizen and the European Union, at least perceived in many people's minds. But there is also the problem that actually it's the same thing that's happened in the national level. This was something I was saying 20 years ago, that it's the same disconnect. The European Union is just so much further up there is the disconnect. But on the national level, you also see the elites are being treated by parts of the population as being completely out of touch. So the question of the legitimacy of any system deciding something for me is being questioned. And then you have, say, without naming two member states who particularly stick out, countries who admire the Putin system and say, actually, managed democracy is perfectly fine for me as well, within the European Union. And then you have the Brits who've gone off and sunk in the Atlantic somewhere. So, you have a changed internal democracy dynamic, which is undermining that ability to be strategically anything, let alone autonomous. Fourth and second to last, economic. You put your finger on this. We have a single currency. We're starting to go towards a better single fiscal zone. Let's be honest, the decisions last year were a step in that direction, but we're far away from it still. And we certainly don't have the political control over it. Back to your democracy argument. You add on, in addition, the debt question. Whether that's actually so important or not, I don't know if you've heard about Olivier Blanchard, former World Bank economist, chief economist, comments on this, that maybe actually it doesn't really matter. That would be very interesting if it were the case. But in any case, there is a big question mark about, how much can we actually afford the big talk that we are now making. And the fifth thing, frankly, I think the most important, almost in a sense, ideological. Let me throw back to what Jetta was saying. I actually don't think the European project was about strategic autonomy. I think the European project was about a different way of conducting international affairs. It was fundamentally about engaging with others, bringing them on board. Her points about, say, not just Africa or Asia, where all these populations are being born, is you've got to do something with them. You cannot pull back and say, we're pulling the frontiers. So in a sense, strategic autonomy is almost against the principle of which Europe is built, which is about cooperation across frontiers. So for me, there is a kind of a grain, which might also be the grain, and that's a little bit where I'll come to in my second intervention, if I get a second intervention, where I try and give some hope. It's the grain that's in the oyster shell. It's a kind of rubbing thing because it's annoying, because it doesn't work. We can't just say we're going to pull down the shutters on the rest of the world and now we're going to be fine on our own. Let me leave you with that depressing thought.
So you said you stop on the depressing, so you'll come back for the happy end later. Okay, thank you, Adrian. Yeah, I agree with many things you said. Yes, about this, especially this last point you make, that the EU. Well, I think it's both. I think the EU was also designed to rebuild our autonomy after the Second World War, where we were destroyed and we had to rely on the US. And so the idea was, of course, to rebuild some kind of strength. But I agree that there is a model of governance, of supranational governance, which is really the most interesting part of the European construction afterwards. And interestingly, we have this conclusion in the GIB bulletin on this article, saying that is the EU model has to move to the international level, in fact, and that's in order to contribute significantly to rebuild a new global order based on some principles tested by the EU. Is that what you have in mind, Adrian, too? And who would like to comment that?
Maybe I can jump in a bit more specifically after a very general start. To go back to the concept of autonomy and to what Adrian was just saying, I think we have to go back to the first articles of the EU treaties. You know, the European Union is a union of values that was created at the start to actually create peace in Europe. And so indeed, at the start, it was a system meant to help countries cooperate across borders. And it was a baby that was born in waters that were very conducive to openness, free trade, you know, cooperation between democracies, you know, around the world. So by nature, the European Union is very open, okay? And so here I think that we have to make sure that we see clearly the difference between, you know, autarky and autonomy. You know, autonomy in the minds of Europe is clearly not autarky. And that's why now people talk about open strategic autonomy and not just about sovereignty or autonomy on its own. Because the Union wants to maintain, you know, a very collaborative international order in which people can build, you know, mutually beneficial relationships between the different powers around the world. You know, over the last 20 or 30 years, you've seen, you know, this free trade that was promoted very strongly by the European Union, you know, in many sets of circumstances. But then, as Marie-Hélène was saying earlier, reality has come back kicking at the door. You know, and what the COVID pandemic has shown is that Europe was actually extremely dependent, because or thanks to its openness, on supply chains spanning the whole world. And all of a sudden, the day we needed something, we couldn't get it because it was manufactured halfway across the world, and you know, communication links had been shut down because of the pandemic, and all kinds of things happened, and we couldn't get protective equipment, and industrial chains had to stop because they couldn't supply their raw materials and parts and whatever. And so all of a sudden, people have said, "Oh, well, we thought that, you know, free trade, you know, was going to be our guarantee for, you know, mutual benefits for everybody, welfare, and will provide, you know, a sense of security thanks to our multiple links with many people." And then all of a sudden, we saw that, well, actually, it does work to some extent, but when shit hits the fan, well, sometimes it just stops working. And so that's where all of a sudden the concept of autonomy started to gain again, you know, attention. So on the one hand, you know, we have people negotiating trade deals, you know, and continuing to promote free trade, you know, but on the other hand, people are starting to say, oops, you know, but we're dependent, or we have become dependent on strategic rivals for key pieces of kit, you know, whether it's batteries for electric cars, whether it's chips for our IT systems, whether it's pharmaceuticals, you know, for making our vaccines or making our tests, things like that. And people are starting to say, well, we want to maintain openness because ideologically we are an open project, but we have to lose some of our naivety and ensure that we have a few key elements of sovereignty under our direct control. And so we need to rebalance a number of things, you know. And so I think that's what, you know, that's the debate where we are seeing emerging right now. And in particular, after the experience with Donald Trump, where the assumption that we could always count on the US was maybe a bit, you know, difficult to, I mean, not completely realistic. So the arrival of President Biden is changing the picture, of course. But I think that people are not going to forget completely the Trump experience, and then Europe will have to learn to also stand on its own feet and maybe rebalance the transatlantic relationship.
We have some questions from the public, I think, that may connect what said Laurent just for a moment, because it's true. Maybe it's an occasion, seeing that the situation geopolitics is changed with Biden, but we can see also the imprint of the United States here in Europe, as for Draghi, for example. But if we look at this, we see that in this moment, Draghi and Macron seems to go towards a little path to begin. I don't know, but in any case, this question may join what some public made in our chat, because this topic seems broad and complex. So, what sector or member state for you should work on to build a strategic autonomy? For me, I see a little beginning, maybe Macron and Draghi, I don't know. And for you? Who wants to speak?
You're asking very complex questions here every time.
Hey, but it's for our public. Our public is a certain level. So, who wants to? Adrian, you want to say the second part, maybe?
Well, go on,
Marie-Hélène,
or Laurent. This question, Adrian or Laurent, this question on which sector could be prone to this kind of move towards strategic autonomy. I would like to quote the sector of energy, which, by the way, is we built the European communities on energy, on communalizing energy, and we had a discussion today. So it's interesting to link it on Euratom. And it's Euratom dates back. It's the idea that Europe will need to build its strategic energy autonomy. That's in 1957. And Euratom is one of the pillars, and it's about nuclear energy, because, of course, we don't have, other than coal, we don't have energy available, so we depend on others. And so we have this project. And then come, indeed, all the period after the 90s, the years 2000, due to also the Chernobyl accident and the Fukushima, and then the whole environmental anti-nuclear, which, of course, is due to the fact that the nuclear is also associated with the military nukes. So there is a whole public opinion that goes against that. Have we lost somehow track, partly on our project of independence, because we've lost tracks on this energy, communalizing energy that was the project originally? And could it be that today, we see that indeed the green is also a way to reestablish this notion of the energy being at the core of our construction. But we see that today the green energy, the renewables are being very much questioned, because they are going to be very costly. They might not be sufficient until 2035, 40, 50, we don't know. So what do you think? Do you think this is a sector indeed that is relevant and it is already maybe there, but is there a way to strengthen the fact that it will restart from there? Adrian or Laurent or whoever.
Yes, I think energy is a good example, because energy sits at the core of the economy. So it's a fundamental issue. And right now, energy is at the crossroads between the discussion about strategic autonomy and the discussion about sustainability, and switching away from fossil fuels. And so what's interesting, what we see in Europe right now, is that the question of nuclear energy is creating a dilemma for the environmentalists, for the green parties, because ideologically they were always against nuclear power, but now nuclear power is emerging as one of the most reliable carbon-free energy sources. And the development of other types of technologies like windmills or photovoltaic panels actually require the use of a huge amount of metals, especially if you electrify transport and then you go to electric cars. So you are switching from a dependency on the import of oil and gas, for example, to a dependency linked to the access to metals, where also Europe is very limited. And so these are very, strategic questions, which are quite acute, and which come at the crossroads between very many different types of or policy domains at European level, in which trade-offs, and balance between different interests will have to be struck.
So, Adrian?
Yeah, I think there's a number of points being made here, and maybe I pick up on a couple. I notice also Ludovic in the chat, for instance, has asked about what does autonomy really mean? Is it regaining control over certain critical aspects? And, is 5G or is, communication using Microsoft? I'd actually say Amazon is the bigger threat. It's kind of going to wipe out everything. Why? Because it's a platform economy. And basically, you need that platform on which to build all your services, and everybody's going to depend on that platform. And if that platform isn't yours, it's somewhere else, then ultimately all the money gets sucked to Washington State or wherever it happens to be the particular platform is being built. So there is an element around there. And I pick up on something Laurent said about autonomy versus autarky. And this is one of the reasons why I'm more optimistic, shall I say, because autonomy is not autarky. But I think the key thing that we have to get our heads around, and which is going to have to take place, is a switch of thinking. And that switch of thinking is not just necessary for us to be able to be autonomous. It's a necessary thing for the planet to survive. It is the switch from the economic efficiency drive to the notion of resilience. And we're seeing the problem is that we are, basically just-in-time lean production. The entire system of the world is built on the notion that something arrives and you don't have any inventory, and so you can just do this. But actually, if we're going to be seriously resilient, we're going to have to think very differently, because that's not going to work. Not just because of pandemics. There are always going to be shocks. My normal background is a black swan, by the way. I mean, this is what I have, and it's not for an accidental reason. It's what I spend my life dealing with. And what we see as regards that is that there is a need to switch our thinking. And resilience means that you have to actually structure your economy fundamentally differently. It's no longer about the annual profit per se. You have to think in that long-term dimension. So how can we get that long-term dimension being brought in? Now that requires, what I'm describing is this is what we should do. Now you're all going to start shaking your heads and going, oh my God, it's not going to happen. Okay. Well, actually, if we're going to survive, it's going to happen. Because of the climate challenge, because of, actually, I don't even hang it on the climate. I suspiciously think we're poisoning the entire environment with microplastics, with God knows what else. And we are not going to survive, not just because we're going to boil ourselves to death, but we're just going to poison ourselves to death at the end of the day if we don't change fundamentally. So we're going to have to go in that direction. Now, that's the opportunity, the choice, the option, the chance for the European Union. Because of the fact that we're pushing this agenda and we are being seen as the lead in that agenda. Interestingly, speaking to some friends from, for instance, EIT Climate Kick, which is promoting climate innovation technologies, they're entering into conversations with Korea, with California, about the specific missions that the EU has set itself within the Green Deal. For instance, with regards to transport, local transport, cars, whatever. Why? Because those other places are saying, hey, the mission you've set yourself is something we want to set ourselves as well. Let's do this together. Okay. Now, what I'm getting at, autonomy is, as you said, Laurent, it's not autarky. It is the ability to drive an agenda and to put it through despite resistance. I use that as a posit. Okay. That being the case, we can choose the sectors, and actually the sectors, I therefore go back to your question, Jordi, is actually it's all around the future sustainability. And that sounds like it's a very small thing, but actually ultimately it becomes everything. And energy is just one part of that. It's the first part. It's the part we're most advanced on that we've thought about. But frankly, the next one for me is agriculture. Agriculture is horribly polluting. Food security, absolutely, and it's actually about completely new ways of making food. I don't know if you know this Finnish startup that's using vats to generate proteins, which you can at least feed dogs and dog cats with, and then you can get rid of a load of cows being slaughtered as a result. Okay, I don't want to go there, but technology is going to provide a bunch of levers that we can use if we're clever. One last thing I'll throw in there. This is why I'm starting to be a bit more optimistic, as you might have noticed. One of the statistics I read, I think it was in The Economist this week, mentioned that 20 years ago, 3/4 of the startups in terms of value, when they were market capitalized, were in Silicon Valley. This year, it was 3/4 are not in Silicon Valley. In fact, they're not even in America. And you might have noticed, actually, the latest one, Jetta, you'll be really pleased to know, is a Romanian startup. Yeah, it's this UiPath. They have a higher valuation than Spotify. Yeah, there are now signs of possibilities of things, and it's the decentralization around the world of the options. The problem we're going to face is, can we get over those platforms? Can we get over those initial actors that I was describing who still see things in zero-sum game world power? I'm afraid Biden has not changed. Look at the policy on the vaccines for this. We're not going to give it to the nasty guys. We're going to do it for our friends. So we've got to get over that to get to that long-term goal I was describing of thinking longer term and thinking resilience, not thinking efficiency. Otherwise, we're not going anywhere nice. But that's the challenge for the planet.
Yeah, very. Can I'm the doomsayer, but I'd like on the food security, for instance, in a world where inflation, scarcity, it seems to be the new normal somehow. Do we see really, for instance, the fact that the Chinese demand, for instance, of food on Europe is going to disrupt the PAC, the Common Agricultural
Policy?
Are the European agricultural farmers going to sell their food to the Chinese because they will give a better price, like we had, for instance, with the vaccine, where because we negotiated low prices, we ended up with no vaccines or with less vaccines. So voilà. So how can we be strong in what are the kind of vision that you of strategy that you describe, which I completely agree on. That is voilà, something we would like for Europe. But how is Europe, weak as it is politically, capable of not shutting itself completely? Because that's the risk. Faced to this Chinese, for instance, I'm making it Chinese because voilà, there are 1.5 billion people there who need to feed themselves, and they are organizing flows of food towards them, and we are on their routes. And what is about food? What is the future of food sovereignty and the cap in this context, for instance? And this is voilà, this one point that I wanted to make. Who would like to react also on this?
I can jump in, quickly, but when you see the combination of action which is needed in so many different sectors, you really understand the importance of developing a systemic understanding of the whole system at the scale of the European Union. So I think that's point number one. I think point number two is, if the European Union wants to maintain a position of leadership and wants to maintain a capacity to lead by example, it has to create autonomy. And I think that's what the big lesson from COVID-19 was. People are starting to realize this. And when you see, the trouble that emerged between the member states, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and all these discussions about the future of the EU budget and stuff like that, and these enormous disagreements that you saw emerge between different groups of European countries, or European Union countries, should I say better. Then you saw that when people are with their back to the wall, in the end, countries have understood that without a minimum of European solidarity, they cannot go anywhere. And so I think that it's a sort of realpolitik, it's people, the reality check that has pushed the European countries, even though they might think differently, even though they might be culturally quite different, even though, their budgetary reflexes or cultures might be different, the force, of the events, and of the external constraints are such that they are condemned, to find an agreement. Otherwise, they are just going to be swallowed by, all the big boys around, whether it's China, the US, or whomever else, can emerge, in this very fast changing world. So I think that there is an external logic which is very, very strong to actually keep the European Union together. And it's a bit paradoxical because on the one hand, you see very strong forces to, and that led to some extent to the Brexit, and you see strong forces that would actually lead to destroy the European Union. But at the same time, you've got equally strong forces that, in my opinion, are putting the European Union back together. And so when you see the progress in the integration of European Union policies over the last 2 years, you would have asked anybody a year before the COVID pandemic whether that would ever happen. And a lot of people would have said, either it would never happen or it would be something for the next generation, and you've seen that happen in the matter of 1 to 2 years. So we have to take a systemic view. We have to take a long-term view. And I'm very much in agreement with what Adrian Taylor was saying before, in terms of, connecting the dots.
We have another question, I think, connected to what we are saying, because if we have to push an agenda more than autarky, but autonomy is pushing an agenda, how can we support this in terms of influence? Ludovic made the example that US and China finance this push forward their economy. But it's true that an economy paradigm to change in Europe, I think it's important. Maybe to push forward toward this, changing and pointing also on what we have as resources, because in the domain that I work, innovation technology, many projects and ideas you can find in the territory of Europe. In our territory, there are intelligent, smart competence, they exist, but maybe sometimes they float and they are not financed. So we can start also by ourselves for this. What do you think? Who want to comment about this pushing forward? Adrian, Laurent?
Jump in.
Okay. Well, but Jetta and Marie-Hélène, you should also at some point. Let me thank you, Ludovic. I think there's some good points there. Let me start with the what is it we should push forward in terms of an agenda, and let me pick up on just what Maria was saying. We have a lot of bright people around here, and I don't just mean in this room listening to us today. I mean actually in Europe as a whole. What do we find blocks, in a sense, things from moving forward? Part of it is actually our own constraints, our own thinking. That what we have is we have people coming up with brilliant solutions that are point solutions that will deal with a problem, and they can deal with this. What they lack is what Laurent's saying is the system around them. That this solution, which maybe recycles entirely that plastic bottle or whatever it is not valid in our current economic system because it costs too much. Or that you cannot separate the plastic. Why? Because the plastics have no label, and so you have different mixtures of plastic and you don't even know which plastic it is you have to take to recycle how, or whatever it is. Okay, how do we deal with that? We start dealing systemically with innovation and with the economy in that respect. And let's take agriculture, that it's not just about getting drones to spray micro quantities of pesticide, which they can do already. There's nothing new about this. They already have machines that can do, using 1/25th of the current amount of pesticides, you could grow the same amount of crops. Think about what that would be as a revolution. But what are the barriers to that? Oh, well, for instance, you're not allowed to fly drones with pesticide in Europe because actually that could be used to spray somebody and that would kill them. Okay, so we've got to start tackling these systemic issues, okay? Now, that sounds, oh my God, but no, systemic issues, remember what Laurent will tell you this as well as I, as a systems analyst. The whole point of doing systems analysis is you identify the couple of small levers that you need to pull to make the system shift. It doesn't mean you have to tackle everything at once. In fact, that's the last thing you should do. Okay, so identify those couple of levers, tackle them. Second, what should we push? I actually pushed this question to my team. I have 6 employees. Okay, we came up with the European Union's CO2 foreign policy. Foreign policy is traditionally dictated either by security or by economics. You have a foreign policy which is about defense and making sure we're strong, or it's about money. Let's earn money. What about if we be different? What about in exchange, in response to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, we start the carbon neutral globe? Let's start pushing that as a strategic autonomy drive, because if we believe seriously that this Green Deal is about making Europe, the rest of the world is not going to just have to sit there. We want them on board as well. So let's try driving that vector. And the third thing that I would say, again, in that sort of logic of what do we need to support that agenda of influence? Change thinking.
Thinking. Yes, a comment of Ludovic that say that it's true. So very frequently you listen. Another amazing idea born in Europe and grew in US or China because not enough capital and they're in Europe. And so this for autonomy, how we can match. It's true that frequently United States funds come here. Maybe they have the money, so why we don't have in Europe? We have, because if in the European Bank we change paradigm and we finance more quickly and more wide our project, we don't need too much for the first time the others. Maybe they can join because we can collaborate. I'm not to eliminate, we can be together, but we can start from here. What do you think about this, Laurent, that you are inside? What you say about this? And then Jetta and Marilyn also, yes, because.
So I think that when I see some of the comments that are being written, I think that what we've discovered is the limit of our economic culture and our economic understanding that has been dominating the reasoning and the policy making over the last 30 years. Okay. And what you see emerging, at the level of the European Union now is a re-emergence of the importance of values, saying, well, we've left, the free market decide that, Amazon and Facebook and Google, would become humongous companies and are making enormous profits. But then we're starting to understand that actually this is to the detriment of something else. So economically, it's very successful, but it's not successful in Europe. And on top of it, it's actually threatening democracy. People have understood that people are being manipulated, that democracy is under threat thanks to these tools. And so there is a sort of wake up happening. And I will mention actually a recent GRC report called Technology and Democracy, understanding how social media, influences, our behavior, which highlights the dangers of these unfettered economic actors. And so now the European Union has decided to go for a Digital Services Act to start to put, a few regulatory ideas in place to start to regulate, what these people can do, and start to really think about, ethics or European values, stuff like that. There is a European Democracy Action Plan, which also tries to actually support, democracy and highlights what needs to be done to avoid, these big IT actors, subverting our democratic systems. And so you see, besides the traditional discussions about economics, raw material supplies, value chains and stuff like that, you start to see discussions about autonomy also starting to tackle, okay, who do we want to be? How do we want to live in Europe? We want to have the right to be different from everybody else. So yes, we are ready to some extent, fight for our values and to promote, what we consider as universal human values, also in places like China, but with mixed success, I would say. But you clearly see that in the political discussions at European level, the debate is reopening, and creating more space for dimensions which are not strictly economic.
Yes, I think it's an important occasion, as said in the GIB. There is now this convention for the future on Europe. We should see if this can be integrated, not only to have some idea from the citizen, but also to integrate, to move forward. What do you think, Marie-Hélène, Jetta? Who wants to?
Yeah, that's one aspect, because we in the SCIB we think that there is this aspect of this structural reform that is required to address these challenges, as I said at the beginning, and to reconnect citizens to this EU level, not only of action and understanding and decision, of course. And this conference on the future of Europe does provide what we call the Nagora. It is an agora, like in the Greek sense of the expression, put in the middle of the European city. We can hope that it can help. will this agora manage to invite to gather people who and help the emerging trans-European political parties, voilà, to connect, to strengthen their content, their programs, to maybe, is it a place from where will emerge and strengthen these trans-European political parties that we need to connect European citizens and European level of decision-making? If so, we can have hopes that in 2024, for the next European election, there will be, the citizens will add on to these projects, which for now are not hardly known by the people. That's also the problem. So information remains national, so they're not gonna be helpful in making people understand these challenges and trying to build a common culture and to push in those right directions. So maybe these trans-European political parties that we've, Adrian as well too, for 30 years have been hoping would emerge. Could it be that it happens? But by 2024, and that's something that we see very much in the GIB, is the gap. We have a gap between 2021 and 2024, 25. There are lots of deadlines on 2025 on many things, digital currencies, environmental deadlines, and democracy. But we have 4 years to go. How are we going to cross these 4 years? Voilà, that's something that we fear very much. And the last remark I'd like to do is, we were mentioning how the citizens in Europe seem to be both sometimes very anti-European, against this centralized Brussels system that they don't understand very well, but at the same time, indeed, they are aware that their national level is not sufficiently always, is not relevant completely to act. Is it, again, because there is something that needs to be rethought in terms of the structure? As Adrian said, in the 60s, in the end of the 50s, it was a project of inventing something really new in terms of supranational governance. And today, with the internet, the digital, the new text and everything, digitization, etc., do we need somehow to think strongly and have in common a vision of a Europe which would be, and that's where I think the word resilience comes in also, which would be more organic, which would really connect national levels, regional levels, city levels, in a coordinated manner, which wouldn't be centralized, which wouldn't appear as being centralized. And how can we reach there? That's again, is it there? It is there already. Of course it is there. We have the technology. We have all these different levels of acting. How can EU systems sort of at some point understand that this is the new reality? It's not state-based anymore. It's something more. It's connected also to the outside. And how can we reflect something in the structure of the EU so that the EU becomes again, I would say, an environment that is really prone for all these energies, all these clever people that Adrian mentioned, to actually embark our continent on these paths.
So we are near to finish this point. Very, very interesting. So a small, short tour for everybody. Jetta, you want to add something? Because
yes, I just want to add to something that Marie-Hélène just said, and maybe it's the conclusion of this debate. Maybe we don't need to be autonomous now. Maybe we just need to work towards something that is related to autonomy, but not protectionist, not closing our continent, on itself, but still remaining open. Because I'm just afraid that maybe this goal of becoming autonomous might become a sort of a license to kill smaller economies and smaller companies and smaller countries. And it's really not something that we want to give as an impression of our continent.
Yes, it's clear. Maybe we have to restart by ourselves, taking all together, all the people, all the citizens, taking all together at all the level, because we have our structure, our architecture of European. So the intelligent not lack, still there, the means of production are there, and all the structure is there. So we have maybe. We need more politics will now we can take this occasion of COVID, even there is American and China, that we can take this occasion to push forward. So if someone wants to add, otherwise we can keep
one last word by Adrian and Laurent, and then we can close, I think. Huh?
Adrian was saying something about a very optimistic ending of this, so we are waiting for that.
Yes, Adrian.
Yeah. Well, you've had
a positive ending.
You have some optimism already from my colleagues, so I'm happy about that. But actually, I think that the greatest thing we can do is think. One of the points links to what Laurent said. It's about thinking values. You do see a reconnection everywhere I bumped in this year. I've had 3 projects totally unrelated to each other that each have bumped into the fundamental thing that even CEOs of large corporations are starting to say values. Yeah, that's much more important. I need to think more about this. Now, they're not yet doing anything about it, but there's already an flavor in the air. That is a tremendous opportunity. And I link that to the second thing. Thinking again, how we do things. It's not just by following the international best practice. Let's be honest, international, or should we say, the European Union has tried to be on a very competitive place by following international best practice, often trying to even set it. Let's try and go in a different direction. Let's try and encourage, for instance, companies that are not for profit, not NGOs, companies. You know, like a Danone it was until the American investors came in and threw the CEO out. Okay. Let's try and promote that kind of thing with law changes, changing to accounting. So it's no longer a question of actually you have to be lean because otherwise your operating working capital counts against you. And that's bad for the books. Change the accounts. Change the law on that. Make it that it aligns to our values. They're not big changes. Back to our systems theory. Systems is not about changing everything. Systems is about picking out a couple of things in the system and saying, we're going to do this, this, and this, and then let's see what happens. So let's do those. Think, posit, charge. Finally, I think the whole point is also bottom up. I'm hearing this again and again. The real projects that will succeed are those that are carried by the citizens. So why don't we start competitions where groups of citizens can say, you know what, I want to electrify my area in renewable energy, and I'm just going to group together with the local people. It's not institutions. It's groups of citizens getting together, and we start sponsoring them. Maybe we need to have a new legal system, a new legal format for that. So as there is a legal, it's not an NGO, and it's not maybe it's one of those not-for-profit companies I'm talking about that can associate. So we need to start experimenting with these things, trying doing things, but not just saying, oh, the best international best practices, so we're going to obey. Think. That's where autonomy starts.
Thanks a lot, Adrian. I agree with you. You know, autonomy is our capacity to think for ourselves. You know, really, that's where it starts. And that's where I think that foresight is quite useful, because it can help us envisage, you know, what kind of futures we could be confronted with. But then the next step is, you know, it can help us create a shared vision of, you know, a future we want to build together. And that can be quite positive. So we can face to the constraints we will be confronted with. You know, we have to deal with climate change. We have to stop using fossil fuels, you know, all kinds of things like that. But then, you know, this kind of exercises can help us actually identify the new paradigm according to which we want to live in the future. And so that can actually give us a capacity to show an example in the world, you know, for other people. Because right now, you know, essentially the picture we're giving is more that of a failed, you know, liberal economic system, you know, when we're faced with the Chinese, for example, and our own failings are being used by the Chinese to bolster their own, you know, political system. So what we have to do now is be bold in our thinking to be able to actually shake things a little bit and you know, strengthen our own system to show that we can be a happy, you know, and comfortable place to live in the world. So that's probably our strongest, you know, possible statement for the European Union.
Yes, thanks a lot. I think we can finish here, standing by our selves and what we have done the best during the history, because history may learn many things. And so what is done for the process of all, we can start from this kind of way to do thinking, and then join with the other. And I hope that the convention on the future of Europe may give some idea and may allow to debate and keep in account. So I thank you all very much. The comments say that these are food for thought, and yes, is our intention also to give for everybody a food for thought, because as you said, Adrian, it's important to think and important to look around, learn from the past and go forward, not repeat the worst, but maybe start from the best. So I thank you all very much. And I give the appointment for our next GIB and then next reflection on this idea. Thanks you a lot, Marie-Hélène, Adrian, Jetta, and Laurent.
Thank you very much.
See you next.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Let's keep thinking together.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.